So we're looking at Google Maps and we've got Colchester towards the lower left of the screen and Ipswich towards the upper right. The Orwell runs down from Ipswich, of course, and joins to the Stour. And the Stour runs from east to west into Mistley and Manningtree and then up to Cattawade. So let's just quickly go to the satellite view and zoom in a bit. So there's Mistley to the east, Manningtree to the west, the walls in between, Hogmarsh Island, the railway, the White Bridge and Cattawade Marsh to the top left. But we're going to have a closer look at these now. So as you can see, Steve has done another one of his fantastic maps with a little blob showing you each of the areas that we're going to be covering, as well as a blue line showing you the path if you want to walk. So you've got H is Mistley Quay to the east and all the way through to A, which is Cattawade Marsh in the west. And the blue line goes off the side of the map and you can even walk all the way through to Flatford if you want to. It's a lovely walk. But we're going to start at point E in the middle of the map here. And the reason we're going to start there is because it's good for parking. So E is actually the co-op, which is in the middle of Manningtree. But the road outside the co-op, as you can see, there's a short section of double yellow lines and then you can park. And to my knowledge, there's no restrictions. If this area is full, there is a main car park in the town, which is about a 2 or 3 minute walk away. It's free parking for 3 hours. Whatever you do, please don't use the co-op car park itself for parking because that's obviously reserved for customers. When you're out of the car, you can walk through a gap in the wall and along the front of the co-op itself. And you can't see it from here, but it's behind the trolley park, but there's a short bridge and the bridge goes over a little dike that runs through here. And you can go up the steps onto the main seawall, or you can follow the path to the left along the bottom and join the seawall after a couple of 100 yards. If steps are a problem, because there's a couple here to get down onto the bridge, then in the corner of the car park, there's a footpath. And the footpath is much more easily accessible. It can be a little bit muddy sometimes, but when you go around the corner of the footpath, you've then got a choice. You can either follow the lower path or you can go up the steps to the higher seawall path. As you can see, both paths run parallel and they join in the distance. You can just about see it up the end here. And where they join, the slope up here is quite shallow. So it's good access for people that are going to find the steps difficult. You can come along the bottom and get up to the top path quite easily. When you're on the top path, there's an Essex County Council information board, and this shows you some of the species that you're likely to come across, shows you where you are and gives you a little bit of history of the area too. So that's quite interesting to have a quick look at. And there are also plenty of places to stop and have a cup of coffee and a sandwich, or even spend a few hours if you don't want to go for a long walk. So probably 4 or 5 benches along that section. Each one gives you a slightly different view of the river. And it's really nice just to sit and while away a few hours. Talking of views, I'm sure you'll all agree this view is quite spectacular. So we're looking from the top path by the co-op, east along the river. You can see Felixstowe docks in the distance here, and the riverbed itself snakes around, plenty of mud flats. This is obviously low tide, lots of mud exposed for the birds to feed on, and some boats as well. So if you're into boat watching, it can be quite nice to see the boats too. But we're here for the birds. And as you can see, the mudflats do get quite busy. So this is taken from a little bit further along the path and with a slightly more zoom on the lens. And you can see on the mud here, we've got avocets. In the water, we've got common gulls, we've got black-headed gulls. There's a crow or possibly a jackdaw just here. Some lesser blackback gulls in this area here. You get great blackback too. There are redshank in the middle, and then in the distance there were black-tailed godwits, there were brent geese, pintails, teal, all sorts of things, and some really good views. So as you can see, there's lots and lots of stuff to look at, and it's a really great area. So it does pay to have a scope. If you've got a scope, please bring it with you, because obviously there's a bit of distance involved here. If you don't have a scope, then there is plenty of stuff close by, and we're going to walk along the river in a second and all of that area is quite good binocular view. Let's have a slightly closer look at the avocets quickly. One of them was sat in a little hollow in the mud, whether it was just having a sunbathe or whether it was practicing for the coming weeks, I don't know, but thought it made quite a nice picture. And very close nearby were a couple of other birds just feeding, walking through the mud flats and scything from side to side through that mud and sifting out their dinner. Back to the map. So that was kind of point E in this path here. And we're going to be walking along the path up towards D, C, B and A. So D is Hogmarsh Island. Now, it's not the easiest place to take a photograph of. So Hogmarsh Island itself is sort of this area just above my mouse pointer, and it kind of comes right the way along down the middle of the river, really. You can't access it, but you can view it from the path, and you get some decent binocular views and you get some really good telescope views. So again, if you've got your scope, please bring it, because it's always useful. And on the island in the middle here, you'll quite often get waders, especially when the tide is high. Of course, it's a really good roosting area for black-tailed godwits, common ringed plovers, redshank, and so on. You'll get avocets feeding the far side, plenty of shelduck around, greenshank as well. So there's lots and lots of birds to look out for here. And you'll even maybe get kingfisher up the far end. There's some posts that they like to sit on, and quite often you get kingfisher fly along the sea wall itself, so you can get some close views if you're lucky. And this is a view just a little bit further along to the east, really. So you've got the path running here, the riverbed snaking round. That's a railway bridge that we're going to walk under in a minute. We're heading kind of over here to go through to the splodge. But yeah, it's some really fantastic views, nice close waders and wildfowl, and lots of stuff to find and look at. Instantly, it's worth looking at this pylon as well. Sometimes you might get a peregrine or a buzzard or something sat on the pylon. This is looking across to Hogmarsh Island, so that's a second railway bridge. The one that we've just been looking at is to the left of the picture here. And there are some good views to be had, as I mentioned before. Bring your scope, and lots of areas to scan. Lapwing, golden plover, you know, lots and lots of things, not during the winter, of course. So you never know quite what you're going to find. From the same location, if you turn round and look back towards the town, this is an industrial area just here, worth scanning the rooftops. You never know, you might get a black redstart if you're lucky this time of year. But there's a reed bed along here, and the reed bed is quite often teeming with finches and sparrows and starlings. You'll get goldfinches, and I've heard Chetty's warbler in there. It always looks good for maybe a bearded tit or something. And reed warbler, of course, in the summer you'll hear them chuntering away as well. So don't forget you've got the area the other side of the path to look at as well. So now we're going to head under that railway bridge I mentioned, and we're heading for C, B and A. So this is the railway bridge that we mentioned before, and there's a slope down to it, and it's always wet underneath here, so you can have a blisteringly hot, lovely sunny day, and there'll always be a bit of mud, maybe a puddle in the middle there, so just mind your footing. But when we go through the other side of the bridge and look to the left, we're going to see the splodge. Now, when I first started birding this area, I had no idea where the splodge was, but as I said, if you go through that tunnel, walking east, you've got the pylon, and then this flooded scrape here is the splodge, and it's a really great area to have a look at for all sorts of things, really. Waders, wagtails, yellow wagtail in the summer, pied wagtail, of course. I've had grey wagtail on there as well. Greenshank it's quite good for in the winter. Snipe, teal, shoveler, little egrets. You can get anything really turn up on here. So always worth a scan. Don't forget to have a look, particularly at high tide when the river's really high. Things might be flushed onto this area to continue to feed. And if you look to the right after you get through that railway bridge, there's another run of pylons, 4 pylons extending into the distance. Always worth a look. Peregrine, quite often you may find a peregrine sat on the top of this pylon here, or the one further along, but always scan pylons. Pylons are always a really, really good place to check for your raptors. And then you can see the White Bridge from here as well. So this is the White Bridge, and this area is quite good to, again, check for the waders, but also for little grebe. So for some reason, little grebe, when the tide is high, they seem to love, particularly in the winter, they love this area here for feeding, and I've had a dozen, 15 or so, just bobbing around and feeding away. So have a scan of that area. I think we had pectoral sandpiper turned up there last year in the autumn. So you never know what's going to turn up anywhere, and again, worth a scan. Well, walking further along the path towards the White Bridge, there's a pillbox just on the left, and that is a really good place to stop and set up your scope and have another look at the splodge, because you get to see a different angle. So we were looking at it from the left-hand end here, looking along, and this is kind of looking across the splodge now. So this is the islandy bit in the middle, which you can't see behind here from the other end. But looking at it from the top of this pillbox, you can see if there's anything lurking in this corner, and quite frequently, especially in the winter, of course, you're going to have green sandpiper in that corner, so worth having a look. Back to the map. So that was C, which is the splodge. Now we're going to go to the White Bridge, which is point B. So this is the White Bridge, or at least it's the White Bridge sign as seen from Suffolk looking back into Essex. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm assuming it's called the White Bridge because the railings are painted white. Maybe there's another reason. If there is, perhaps someone could let us know. And if you look west from the bridge, you're looking up the river, and this is the view you get. So the river's snaking away. There is actually a footpath, which I mentioned earlier. You can't see it on the photograph here, of course, but it goes off in the distance to Flatford on the south side of the river. To the north side of the river, you've got Cattawade Marsh, which is this whole area here. Again, not accessible to the public, but you can actually get some decent views, binocular scope again, and you can see some of the area here. And you can just about make out there's a flood at the moment. So if you walk along the path, you can look across and you can get quite a nice view of that as well. And just in the distance there, not sure if you can see it on your screens, but that's the red barn that you may have heard people talking about as a reference point. Sometimes we're scanning for stock dove, like to sit on the roof there. Now, I'm sorry to do this to you all, but we're going to take a very quick step into Suffolk. So I don't know if I should be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So yeah, the river itself is the border between Essex and Suffolk, of course. And if you walk carefully into Suffolk, not because there's anything wrong with Suffolk, just because there's no footpath on this side of the road, so you have to tread a bit carefully, or you can cross over and there's a footpath the other side. But on the left, just up here, this is an area of Cattawade that's usually flooded and worth a look. You can get a decent view from just behind that Suffolk sign, actually, that I just showed you. And you'll have wildfowl, widgeon, shoveler, waders, lapwings, quite good in this area, particularly in the summertime. And it's a really nice area just to stand and have a look at, and you never know what you're going to see. Marsh harrier as well. I marsh harrier over there quite regularly. And here's another view of Cattawade Marsh taken from the bridge. You can probably tell I didn't take this the other day. This was a misty morning a couple of years ago, I think. But lovely area, plenty of different habitat here. You can see there's often livestock grazing, keeping the grass nice and short. I've had lots of yellow wagtails here last year. I think there was 10 to 20 yellow wagtails, little flock in the autumn, just getting ready to go. Snipe again, you quite often get on the edge here, and all sorts of different things can pop up. Stone chat, meadow pipits, maybe reed buntings, so worth a scan, and just a nice area all round really. And then the other side of the road, there's a field that's completely flooded. So just in the distance here, there's an area of a seawall which has been breached. And this happened a few years ago now, and the water just comes rushing in here as the tide comes up, and the whole area floods. And of course, at low tide, you've got all this beautiful exposed mud. And although there wasn't a single bird on there when I popped my head in to take this picture, it's usually a good place for waders, so black-tailed godwits and redshank. I've seen avocet in there before. I've had ruff in there. And yeah, another one of those areas that if you don't know it's there, it's not the easiest place to find, but there is a small gap in the hedge. There's a little run of steps that you can get down to see this viewpoint. Or there's actually, if you keep walking north along the footpath, there's a little cut-in, and you can then walk along another path which comes out to the left of the picture just here, and you can look back across this field. Okay, so that's E, D, C, B and A all done, and we're going to be heading to F, G and H in a moment. But before we do, let's have a look at some of the birds that I saw while I was walking from E to B. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this. We've got a little egret and a redshank. The little egret's got a bit of a punky hairstyle going on, and they're both having a feed. The egret's obviously in deeper water with its longer legs and bill, and the redshank shallower water, lovely red legs. Then we've got a black-tailed godwit, and that's medium depth. So again, long bill, probing away in that knitting machine style that they have, and lovely plain browny grey winter plumage. Then there was a family of common ring plovers. That was younger birds with a paler brown plumage, and then an adult bird next door just fluffing itself up in the sun. And I had a couple of shell duck were dabbling around in the mud, and there was a group of teal close by. And if you watch, one of the shell duck here really doesn't like the teal, so it chases a couple off there. There's a male teal to the left feeling brave and still feeding quite close, but the shell duck sees him off as well, and then they both carry on feeding. Just made me laugh. Then we've got avocet. Now, this avocet was feeding, scything from side to side, as I mentioned earlier. If you listen, the alert went up. Redshank's avocet was calling, and I wondered why they were calling. Looked round to my left, and there was a red kite. There was actually two red kites at the same time. I got some distant footage of one of them. And again, you can hear the avocets not happy at all that this bird was nearby. Beautiful bird. And then finishing off, got a greenshank. So it's well-known area for greenshank, and this one was just feeding the other side of the river behind the co-op. Beautiful bird, dark wings, grey head, lovely long upturned bill. Okay, so that's everything done up to F. So we're off to F, G and H now. So F is Mistley Walls, and I think they're called Mistley Walls because you can see on the left of the photograph there in the distance, there's a rather long brick wall, and that runs quite an extensive distance along the road. Lots of parking and some really lovely views over the river. So you can see north over the river towards Suffolk. You've got the factory roosting point over the other side of the river, and that can be very good to look for curlew, brent geese in the winter. You'll have the avocet over there, there'll be shelduck and lots of other waders. You can have clouds of knot and dunlin, again, particularly in the winter months, of course. So you'll need a scope to look over there because it's a good mile and a half away, but it's a really nice area to scan. Also along the road, as you can see in the picture here to the right hand side on the greenswood, there's usually a fairly large collection of newt swans. Now, they tend to congregate up the top here because people feed them, of course. Personally, I don't think people should be feeding them on the top there, to be honest with you, because it is quite close to the road, although drivers are usually quite understanding and slow down. But yeah, it's always nice to see newt swans, and they will get really, really close to you because, of course, they think that they're going to get some lunch. So I was scanning across the river and heard kind of a noise coming towards me and turned around, and this swan was making its presence known, charging towards me quite rapidly. And obviously after a bit of free lunch, so I thought I'd better snap off a picture because it could be the last one I ever take. But I think this has probably been ringed by Dave Dutton. So Dave's a good friend of the Society, and I know Dave quite well, and he was actually down there when I took some of these photographs, and this one is, I think, is 4C8H. So if Dave is watching, maybe he can give us an update as to where that bird was ringed and a little bit of history on the bird. Also at Mistley, we get black swans. Now, of course, black swans aren't on the British list because they're not a proper British native bird, and they don't breed, or they're not got a sustainable population in the wild. But they're lovely to see, and if you want a good chance of seeing black swans locally, then Mistley is a good place to go. There's usually a pair down there. I've had 3 before, I think, and they're often on the walls, or if not, they can be up at Cattawade by the White Bridge. I've not seen them up as far as Mistley Quay, funny enough, so I think they tend to go between the bridge and the walls. But they're nice to see, very pretty, obviously a bit smaller than our mute swans, and they always make a nice photo opportunity. And if you turn around and look the other way from the river, there's this large field, and this is a field that's kind of set out to pasture. There's livestock in the background. I think it's a little sort of farm type area. And in the field, you'll often have moorhen and lots of corvids, jackdaws and rooks. I've had Nordic jackdaw there before with the white collar. You'll have quite a few pigeons and collared doves and various other bits and pieces. And above my head when I took this photograph, there's quite a decent sized rookery, and there's lots of activity at the moment. There's adult birds coming to and from the nests carrying large twigs, and plenty of calling and that type of behaviour going on. So it's going to be good to keep an eye on the nests down there over the next few weeks. And then also in the field, there was a family of Egyptian geese. And I think these are probably the first young birds I've seen all year. So you've got the male bird in the middle there with the white head, the female just to the right. They're both obviously guarding and making sure the chicks are nice and safe. And there's 6 young birds there. Now, I think if this is the same pair as last year, they bred in the same area last year, and unfortunately none of the chicks survived. So hopefully this year they'll have learnt something, and 1 or 2 of these little chaps may well survive and grow up and become fine Egyptian geese. And then to the left of that field, there's a kind of a humpback bridge in the pavement, and it's quite easy to miss this, but there's a small pond. It's actually quite a large pond, to be fair, and always worth a look. You're going to get obviously ducks, and you may get geese on here. If you're lucky, you might get a kingfisher, and there's also a small egret roost occasionally here with little egret, and I think there was even a cattle egret there last year. So worth having a look. Only takes a few moments to scan that area, and once again, same as with all birding, you never know what might pop up. But we're going to finish off by turning around and having a quick look at the view you get both up and down the river from the walls. So just a quick pan from east to west with Felixstowe in the east, Suffolk to the north with the factory roost directly opposite, and then looking back up the river towards the co-op in the west. Okay, so that's everything up to G done, and you can see on the map the little pond that we were looking at earlier on is just here. So we're now going to go all the way to the east and finish up at H, which is Mistley Quay. Now Mistley Quay, as you can see, is, sounds like there's a rhyme there somewhere, but I won't go there. It's a quay. It's a dock basically a bit further along here, where they load and unload all the different crates and things. And Mistley Quay itself, plenty of places to pull up and park. You've got the metal fence railings running across the front of the quay at the moment. I think there's plans to remove those and replace with something a little bit more pleasant, but for the time being they're staying, and of course they're there for safety, obviously. There's quite a drop the other side here. You can't really see it from the picture, but there's a good drop down into the water, so you wouldn't want to be wandering off the edge here too often. This fence incidentally is the fence that the Mistley Medgull is famous for sitting on, but we'll come to him or her in a minute. So this is a view kind of through the fence, really looking back towards Felixstowe. You can see the boats and docks in the distance, and there's this massive bar in the middle here, which this remains exposed until the last second when the tide comes in. So you'll find that all the waders and gulls that are present here will be kind of huddled into a big group in this area just here, really. And you can have sort of several hundred black-tailed godwits, and they'll stay until the last possible moment, and they'll all fly off in a big flock and go up to the factory roost, which is the other side of the walls. Other good birds that you'll see in this area, particularly in the wintertime, you'll get nice close views of pintail, goldeneye, red-breasted merganser. There's been scaup down here before. There's been Slavonian grebe down here. So another one of those areas, it's worthwhile visiting every single location we've looked at today. If you're in Manningtree, you can spend maybe 20 minutes, half an hour in each spot. You'll get to see a good selection of birds, and you never know what you might find. And of course, we can't finish off talking about Mistley Quay without talking about the Mistley Med gull. So this gull is an absolutely beautiful bird. This picture was taken a week or two ago. It's almost in full breeding plumage. You can see there's a little bit of the winter feathering left here just at the base of the bill. And it's now in full winter plumage, as you can see from my next picture. And there you go. What a beautiful bird to end with. The Mistley Med gull in full breeding plumage, jet black head, lovely white wings. And I love the way that the little feathers on the front edge of the wing here, almost like ailerons on an aeroplane, just kind of catching the wind there to guide the bird round as it sweeps after the black-headed gulls trying to nick their bread. So that's it. Quick guide to Mistley, Manningtree and Cattawade. Hope that's been useful, and thanks very much.